So this happened when I was 19 or 20. I'm 31 now, rarely drink or go out anymore. But last weekend, a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a couple of years asked me out, and we ended up going to a club on the same street where this story takes place and reminded me of it. Legal drinking age in Brazil is 18, so people here start partying pretty early, and let's face it, no one really knows their limits when they start drinking. My friends and I had gone to this club. I honestly can't remember the name right now, but I know it closed down a couple of years back. We had a great time, and the sun was coming up as we were leaving. Most clubs here give you a credit card when you walk in, where you either put in the money you plan on spending, or they work as a personal digital tab where bartenders add up what you're drinking and you pay for it on the way out. I pay for my stuff and sit outside to wait for my friends, who were taking a long time to get out, probably due to being drunk out of their minds. As I'm sitting there, I notice a car across the street. Two dudes in the front seats, one out of the car trying to make this clearly drunk out of her mind girl get inside as well. She's mumbling, stumbling, struggling to keep her eyes open, and she says, "No, I don't want to go." Over and over, shaking her head, clinging onto the car door as the guy keeps telling her to let go and get inside, that they're just going to a friend's apartment to drink some more. It'll be fun, come on. I watch, wondering if I should do something, if no one else is seeing this happening. I look at the club's security guard. He looks at me and shrugs like it's not his responsibility. I look back at the girl and I'm really uncomfortable but also scared. My friends are still nowhere to be seen. I'm alone. The security guard is clearly not doing anything, and there's 3 of the guys. What if they decide to try and get me too? The girl says one more time that she doesn't want to go with them, and before I realize what I'm doing, I'm getting on my feet and shouting, "Hey." The guy stops trying to push the girl into the car for a moment and looks at me. "She said she doesn't want to go, dude," I say, starting to make my way across the street, even though my hands are shaking and my voice is probably not the most convincing. "She's our friend. She's just drunk and being cranky. It's all good. We're just going to take her home," he says. He seems a bit nervous and not exactly angry, which makes me feel a bit better or less scared. "Do you know them?" I asked her, and she just shakes her head no, using the door as support to keep herself on her feet. Creep number 1, the one who is trying to push her into the car, looks at me, then to his friend, who seems frustrated, but starts saying, "Come on, man, let's go. Just leave it." Creep number 1, now looking a bit angry, grabs the girl and pushes her towards me before getting into the car, and they all leave. The girl nearly falls on her face, but I grab her and we walk back to the front of the club, my heart slowly going back to its normal rate. Only then I realized my friends had come out and were watching everything from across the street with confused faces. We all meet random people at clubs, at the door, walking down the street, so they probably thought I'd met someone. I start asking her what happened, if she's alone, where's all her stuff, and she's an incoherent mess, mumbling about losing track of her friends, her purse. She doesn't even know how she paid her tab to leave. I ask for some help to the security guard. He says he can't leave his spot, he can't do anything. I explain what happened to my friends, and they talk to the hostess about it who begrudgingly goes and checks the lost and found. Her purse is thankfully there, minus the money she had in her wallet, and we managed to call her parents. I talk to her mom because the girl can't explain anything, and I promise to stay there until the mom comes to get her. 30 minutes later, the mom arrives, and I've never seen someone look so relieved and terrified at the same time. She thanks me and my friends profusely and offers us a ride home, but as we lived in the next town over, she just drives us to the subway station. In the middle of all the craziness, I forgot to exchange numbers with any of them, so I never heard of that girl or her mom again, but I hope she learned to be more careful with how much she drinks or who she talks to in clubs. Also, shame on her friends for not looking out for her or trying to find her when they realized she was missing, though maybe they were all just as drunk as she was, who knows. I know what I did was probably a bit reckless, but I wouldn't be able to just watch that car drive away and live with myself. Please be safe when going out, people. and creeps at the nightclubs who try to take advantage of intoxicated people. Watch your back. I'm a female and it was 15 at the time. It was my sophomore year in high school. I grew up in a small farming town. Population at the time was about 1,400 in Washington State, United States. I met Ricky, a guy in my shop class, where we flirted daily. I was the only girl in the class and assumed that was why he was flirting with me. I also assumed he was 16 since he was in my grade but had his license. He was actually 19. In school I was popular in that I was friends with everyone, but Ricky was very handsome and very popular for actually being cool. So I was super excited that he paid attention to me and even flirted with me, even though, like I said, I figured it was because I was the only girl in the class. I'll admit, I led him on in a big way. I figured nothing would ever happen between he and I since he was really good looking and popular, and had beautiful girls throwing themselves at him in the hallways and other classes. So the flirting had become more and more overt, with us talking about actually being intimate with one another, even though I had no intention and thought it was never going to happen anyway. Shop class had a regular classroom in the high school where we took attendance and tests, and then the shop itself was located about 100 yards away from the main building. The high school parking lot was on the opposite side of the high school building from the shop class. Our school had an open campus, meaning that students could leave campus during lunch if they had the signed form filed with the office. In late spring of that year, 1997, Ricky and I were flirting one day when he suggested we go through with it. He suggested we leave right after that class during lunch and head to his house. I don't know why I agreed other than realizing I had talked and talked for weeks about it and couldn't admit that I had been lying the whole time. After class, he and I left the shop and walked around the back of the school to the parking lot. We got in his nice truck and drove away from the school. I was freaking out internally because, 1, my friends were expecting me to leave campus with them and were waiting by my locker, and 2, was I really about to do it for the first time? With one of the hottest guys in school, I thought. We drove through town and went to his house about a half-mile from campus. We went inside, and as soon as the door closed, he started kissing me. To this day, this first kiss is one of the best I've ever had. I couldn't completely appreciate it at the time because I was still freaking out. We made our way to his bed and continued kissing for 45 minutes while he kept trying to get me to go further. He had stripped down to his boxers, but I still had everything on, including shoes and jacket. Thankfully, he wasn't pushy, just trying to go through with what we had discussed for weeks. After 45 minutes, I said I wanted to go back to the school. He sighed, put his clothes back on, and we left. We drove to the school in silence. When we got to the parking lot, he asked if I was okay. I said yes and got out and walked quickly inside. Out of my peripheral vision, I saw his truck leaving the parking lot. Lunch was still going on, so I went to my locker, grabbed my books for my next class, and went in the classroom to read until class started. Shortly before class started, 2 of my friends that I was supposed to meet for lunch came in. They asked if I was okay and where I had gone. I said I was fine and didn't want to talk about it. One of the girls then left to go to her class, but the other girl, Allie, was in the class with me, so she stayed. About halfway through the class, I decided to tell Allie what had happened and made her promise not to tell anyone. She was concerned and made sure that I realized that I had put myself in sort of a dangerous situation. No one knew where I was or with whom. I hadn't even thought of that until she pointed it out. The next few days, Ricky went to school but skipped shop class. I was fine with it since I didn't want to see him, mostly because I was embarrassed. Ricky started coming to class again and tried talking to me, but I was quite rude. For about a week, shop class consisted of him trying to talk to me ignoring him sighing and walking away. After that, I was more civil, but never went back to flirting with him. He started approaching me between classes and during lunch, just being friendly and lightly flirty. I never returned the flirting again. Random groups of girls started approaching me and asking what was going on between Ricky and I. Why did he like me? Why was he now ignoring them, etc.? I didn't have answers. The second to last week of school, Ricky hung around me often, but was really quiet. Then he told me that I was the first girl to ever turn him down. During the last week of school, he went back to hanging out with his friends and flirting with the pretty girls. I was relieved mostly because I felt guilty for leading him on and guilty for putting myself in that situation. About midway through the summer holiday, I ran into Allie and she asked me if I had heard about Ricky. No, I hadn't. She said Ricky was on the run from the police for the attempted murder of 2 men. She said she heard it was a drug deal gone bad. I was shocked, and I let my imagination go wild with thoughts of what if. I assumed that if he was willing to end the life of 2 men, what would have stopped him from doing worse things and possibly the same to me? A year later, one of the men died from complications of his wounds, so the charges were changed to 1 charge of attempted murder and 1 charge of murder in the first degree. I later found out that it wasn't a drug deal gone bad, but was actually a failed cartel hit. I have more info on that and why I don't believe Ricky would have ever harmed me or anyone if it hadn't been for his dad's employer, but this story is quite long enough. I don't know whatever happened to Ricky. I heard he fled to California and then possibly to Mexico. He was never caught by the police. I work at a church as an office admin. I'm not a member or even a believer, but it's a good job. This often means that if the minister is out ministering, I am completely alone in a very large building. Usually I like being able to work with nobody bothering me, and I relish the days when nobody drops in or calls. It was one of those quiet days, and I needed to take a stack of materials into the chapel. We never have lights on unless we're using a space, and I usually don't bother turning them on for the chapel. There are stained glass windows, so there's enough light to see by, and it's pretty with just the window light coming in. The area where I'm dropping off some printed materials is up a few steps on the raised area where the choir and organ and pulpit are. Drop the stuff, turn around, and I'm just about to walk back when I notice something. Now, this is an old church with pretty massive wooden pews, so if you're walking straight down the aisle, you only see the backs of them sticking up. You don't really see the seats or the ground between the pews. But from up on the platform area, there's enough of an area that I can see a coat lying on the floor between 2 rows of pews. I'm not surprised. We have a lot of people forget stuff on Sundays. Someone once forgot their teeth. That was fun to look for. So I'm heading down the aisle, looking down each row of pews to find the one the jacket was lying under when I realize it wasn't a jacket. There's a man lying on the floor. Now, it's important to note that there are 3 aisles in the church, the main center one and 2 side ones. I always use the side one closest to the office out of habit. It's dumb, but I just feel silly walking down the wide center aisle of a church. The aisles are carpeted. I wear black, dressy sneakers to work and tend to walk quietly. The man on the floor is facing the center aisle. I freeze and stare at him, expecting him to sit up and say something, but I realize he hasn't noticed me yet. He's kind of wiggling his feet. Not a lot, just kind of rocking his shoes on the floor, so I'm pretty sure he's awake, or at least alive. I have no idea what to do. I've got severe anxiety and CPTSD, and I've long known my fight-or-flight response is to freeze like an idiot. I'm just staring at this guy on the floor, trying to think of something to say. Still not sure what I should have said. "Hello, sir, wouldn't you rather have a seat?" or something like that, when the main doors to the church open. I'd totally forgotten that Paul, one of the members of the congregation, was coming in to do some painting work today. He spots me frozen in the chapel and comes in. He pokes his head in and hollers, "Hey, I'm just going to start working the front, all right?" As soon as Paul started talking, the guy on the floor started craning his head around to see what was going on, or to see who Paul was talking to, I'm assuming. But of course, this man has now spotted me. And my brain still has my jaw wired shut and my feet glued to the floor. The man on the floor starts screaming. I've honestly never heard a grown man full-out scream like that in real life. It didn't sound scared or angry to me. He wasn't trying to make words at all. It was just noise. He scrambles to his feet and starts running down the aisle to the door and slams into it. He charges right out of the building, right past Paul, who just kind of stands aside and watches the man run off. We just look at each other for a long minute before Paul comes over and asks me if I'm okay and what that was all about. I have no idea. I look down and the man on the floor is left behind a backpack. Me and Paul lock the outside doors and take it to the office. I call the cops. They say they'll send to collect the bag and look around the neighborhood, but they don't sound really bothered. Paul decides to look in the backpack, and I try telling him not to, but I'm frankly curious as well. Inside the backpack is a Bible, several disposable plastic spoons covered in foil, an empty bag of hand sanitizer, a roll of plastic wrap, one sock, and a pack of crayons. The Bible? It's one of ours, and he's colored it. Not like a child, or how you'd think a crazy person would. It's not all scribbles all over. And he didn't draw pictures or write in it or circle things. He's literally colored the words, like going along one sentence at a time, coloring words or parts of words different colors. It kind of looks like highlighting in different colors but with crayons, and with sections of different colors changing randomly. There's no blank gaps, so all the pages he's gone through look like a series of rainbow stripes. It's really neatly done. He's gone through the Old Testament up to the book of Esther, which is about 1/3 of the way through the whole thing, which means he's been coloring for a long time. And this is what concerns me. How long had he been in there to color that far? Or did he come in before and take a Bible with him and then come back? And of course, what was he doing lying on the floor, and why did he run out screaming? What were those other items in his bag? This happened months ago, and the good news is I haven't seen him since, but I am uncomfortably aware of how vulnerable I am at work. This happened about 3 summers ago. It was the summer before I went off to uni. It was technically the morning of that huge solar eclipse. You remember the one. My buddy had parties at his house every weekend because his parents would go up to their cottage. The parties were basically a bunch of our guy friends smoking, playing pong and video games with me and my 2 girlfriends. I live in the same neighborhood as my friend, just a couple of blocks away. Usually 1 or 2 of the guys would walk us back to my house at the end of the night since they lived around me and didn't want us to walk alone in the dark. But this particular night we chose to Uber because we were too intoxicated to walk home. We were really cross-faded, so my recollection of the story isn't crystal clear regarding all that was said. So, our Uber pulls up to my friend's house at around 3 a.m., and me and my 2 girlfriends walk up to the car to get in. It was a minivan. We were still holding our coolers in our hands as we were too gone to realize. I opened the door to the back seat, and the driver immediately gave off really weird vibes. He looked at me and had this look on his face, an almost Kubrick stare-esque look, but sort of smiling too. He had long black hair and a ponytail, a beard, and was wearing a neon yellow tracksuit. He also had some type of European accent, but I couldn't tell what kind. I'm Slavic, so I know I had to maybe be Portuguese or Italian or something because it didn't sound familiar to me. He looked at me and did the elevator with his eyes, saying, "I like your shirt," and winked. For starters, I was 17, and this man seemed around late 20s, early 30s. Second of all, I barely had much of a shirt on. I remember I was wearing a low-cut crop top, so my breasts were obviously out. Again, I was really cross, so I just brushed it off and laughed. Me and my friends sat down in our seats, and the driver turned back and said to us, "If we get arrested, you guys are going to jail," gesturing at our open drinks. Again, we were really gone and didn't really care, so we just laughed it off, and my friend Sarah said something along the lines of, "Don't worry, we'll be low-key," or whatever. So we drove off, and I noticed that at the stop sign where I would usually turn left to go home, he turned right. He had a GPS with him, but was clearly ignoring it. I thought he was maybe just cutting through the neighborhood in a different way, so I just went with it. I know the area really good. There's like 5 alternate routes back to my place. Suddenly, we end up on the main road the complete opposite direction of my house. As we headed under an underpass, I turned to my friends and said, "Guys, he's going the wrong way." I looked at my friend Grace, who ordered the Uber, thinking she might have put the wrong address or even her own instead of mine by accident, and she flashed me her screen. She had my address as the drop-off point. I guess the Uber driver caught on to us and turned around and said to us, "Do you guys want to go back to school?" We all looked at each other confused. No, we want to go home," said Sarah. "But all the kids I drive want to go to the school, the big parking lot. That's where I take them," the man said with a creepy look on his face. We knew what school he was talking about. It was our high school, just up the road. It's conveniently located in the middle of a huge field, by the way. "I take all the kids there," he emphasized. I remember the looks of horror on my friends' faces. "No, just drop us off now," Sarah demanded, even though we were still driving down the main road. There was a 24-hour grocery store coming up, so I panicked and yelled, "Just drop us off at the grocery store right now." He glared at me in the rearview mirror and turned into the plaza. He dropped us off at the grocery store, and we didn't even think of looking back to see him drive off. We just ran inside to safety, or so we thought. Minutes later, as we were pacing down an aisle trying to order another Uber, we live in the suburbs, so finding an Uber at 3 a.m. isn't always easy or quick, we see the Uber driver walk past our aisle. I don't think he saw us, but we immediately made a run for it. He then saw us and began to follow us from afar. Soon enough, he made his way closer and closer and closer. We pretty much sped through almost every aisle trying to get away from him. Grace got a notification that a driver was on his way to pick us up, and he was like 2 or 3 minutes away. We decided to go wait at the front of the store, still inside by the exit doors. Roughly 30 seconds later, the man comes up to us. With a bewildered look on his face, he says, "Do you girls want me to drive you home?" We all went pale. "No, don't worry about it. We have a ride," said Grace. It's okay. I can drive you guys home," he insisted. "No, I said we have a ride. It's on the way." That seemed to anger him. "What? You ordered another Uber? What about me?" he said. He was standing very close to us, too. I don't remember his face completely, as I was so high my eyes were barely open, but I remember the smile he had on his face the entire time he was with us. That eerie, nasty smile. "We have a driver," Sarah snapped. The man walked away. The Uber was 1 minute away, but it seemed to be stuck at the red light at the intersection to get into the plaza we were in. We were watching the map on the Uber app on my friend's phone in complete fear, and this felt like the longest couple of minutes of my life. We turned around to see if the Uber driver left the store, but there he was, about 15 feet behind us, standing very close to one of the cashiers who was standing by a display. The poor kid looked super uncomfortable, but we saw that driver kept constant eye contact with us as he was talking to the cashier, pointing at us several times. Suddenly, we saw the Uber driver pull up in front of the store. We sprinted out of the store, not looking back, and hopped in the car, and I just yelled, "Drive, drive, drive," and locking all the doors. The new Uber driver gassed it, and we were on the way home safely to mine. He asked us if we were all right, since we were clearly being frantic. We explained the story, and he told us to report it as soon as we got home, and he would file a report or a witness statement or whatever himself, too. He even said that he would stay in front of the house until we get inside to make sure we're safe. We thanked the man. We were super scared that the previous Uber driver would follow us, as he had my address from when he was driving us earlier. I made sure we locked all the doors, windows, everything once we got inside. I pulled the security alarm and we reported the incident to Uber via mail. The next morning we woke up to 5 missed calls from Uber and an email apologizing, refunding our trips from that night, and a statement saying that the driver will be pulled off the road for Uber as they investigate. We even had an hour-long phone call that afternoon with Uber recounting the entire situation in detail. We never heard back from Uber after that regarding the creepy driver, but I hope to never see him again. What's really creepy is that a few months ago, a younger girl I work with, she was 16 at the time, told me a creepy guy kept hitting on her and making her uncomfortable one night when she was closing alone at the smoothie bar we work at. She describes him as early 30s and wearing a neon yellow tracksuit. I felt my stomach drop. I immediately said, "Black hair, beard, accent? Was he wearing a long ponytail?" And she shuddered and said yes. I still get chills thinking about this man. All events in this story are real except my two friends' names, just to protect anonymity. Lo, June, and I were in middle school when Lo lived across the street from two neighboring elementary schools where we would go hang out at the playground on boring summer nights, typically until 10 to 11 p.m. The schools were separated by an alley and fences, and the playgrounds at least 100 yards apart. We always hung at the school closest to Lo's house. On this night in particular, we were spread out sitting on different levels of a jungle gym. I was up high and must have been more visible as my friends were down low, kind of hidden to anyone walking by. We were talking, joking around as usual, watching the stars, when I have a sudden urge, a sinking feeling in my gut as I do a scan of our surroundings. I see across the alley by the other school lot what appears to be a male figure with a large bag moving in and out of the shadows as if he's coming toward our direction. I try not to freak out at first. It wasn't uncommon for people to be out at nighttime, doing a stroll during the summer, plus there was a security guard who occasionally drives through the lots. But it was the big bag and feeling he was lurking that sets off all the red flags. Something just wasn't right. Within a few seconds of seeing this, I tell my friends it's time to head on back to Lo's and point in the direction I saw the guy so that they could see for themselves, but it was as if he was trying to hide when I pointed that way. They both sort of shrugged it off, as if it's the security guard or someone taking a late-night walk, and they continued to pick back up our conversation, but I couldn't ignore all the alarm bells going off in my head. So I hopped down and slipped on my shoes, letting them know we really gotta go, as I swear the guy is getting closer, and unfortunately I was right. They look over and spot him at an alarmingly close distance. They both jump down and we see him drop his big bag, as if he were surprised that there is three of us, not sure how he couldn't hear all of us. At this point, he was just across the alley about 40 yards and looked like he was picking up pace towards us. I just remembered screaming and yelling at my friends to run. We sprinted to Lo's house, on the complete opposite side of the school, about a half a block away, and we can all hear him legitimately running right after us. I don't know how, but we did keep somewhat of a lead, and as we make it to the locked front door of Lo's house, she fumbles her keys. We all see he's at the end of the driveway and creepily slowed down to a walking pace as we pile into her entryway and lock the door behind us. We see he's on her front step through the privacy glass window of the front door. He's just standing there. We crawled across the ground, trying not to make a sound, to her living room windows that have a view of her front porch, and can see him under the porch light where he's just eerily lingering. He was rough-looking, with tattered clothes and a short, untamed red beard, but his eyes were the scariest, and I will remember them as long as I live. They were so dark and menacing. I can't express how long it felt like he was just standing at her door, glancing the screen window right beside it, and then he proceeds to ring the doorbell. I don't know why we didn't call the cops or go get her parents immediately. Maybe it's because we were all just petrified and full of adrenaline. But with the doorbell ringing, Lo's parents get up out of bed, walking into the living room by the front entryway, noticing that we're all clearly freaking out, asking us what's going on. Her dad pauses at the front door asking who's there, and the guy starts slowly knocking. Her dad continues to refuse opening the door and instead cranked open the screen window beside it to see what he wanted. The dude's response still gives me chills as he replied very calmly, "I just wanted to make sure those 3 females made it home safely." With that, Lo's dad sternly tells him to get off the property as his wife had already called the police. Her dad was bluffing and obviously creeped out. The man quickly and almost angrily apologized, then glanced over as he saw us all crouching down by the window watching him, and he smirks in almost a sinister way while slowly turning around to leave. When he gets down to the end of the driveway, he faces the house and lights up a cigarette as we all just sit there in silence watching him. Lo's mom really did start to move for the phone to call 911 to file a report and have officers come scan the neighborhood. Then after about 1 to 2 minutes, he turned around and walks off down the street. The cops never found him and nothing ever really came of it, but still to this day I can't imagine what would have happened if I had ignored my gut, or if he would have caught up to one of us or gotten into the house that night, but I can guarantee it would have been bad. Always trust your gut, and don't be afraid to ring the alarm. My best friend and I, both 22-year-old females, recently spent 3 months backpacking Europe. We had lots of strange encounters, but this one takes the cake. We had checked out of our hostel and decided to make our way to the international train station to wait for our night train. We had to take 1 or 2 trains to get to the big train station from where we had been staying. It was in a relatively isolated area with just highways and a gas station nearby. We prefer to get to the train station or airports early to get our tickets and make sure we don't miss it. Also, we don't like walking around with our bags for hours. We had a 5-hour wait for the train, so we were both sitting on a bench just passing time on our phones. Around an hour after we arrived at the train station, a police officer comes up to us and asks what we were doing. I politely explained that we're waiting to board the night train. He asked to see our tickets, and I said that we don't have tickets, just our rail passes. He looked at our passes and told us we still need to buy tickets. I thought he meant reservations, as some trains require pass holders to pay a reservation fee, though I had researched the train we were catching and it didn't require any reservation. He told us to come with him, so we gathered our bags and followed him to the ticket office. He told the clerk that we wanted to purchase 2 tickets to Bucharest. I explained that we didn't need tickets and that our final destination was Budapest. He wouldn't listen and kept insisting we purchase tickets. Finally, the lady in the ticket office looked at our passes and printed us something like a seat assignment, and this seemed to satisfy him. The officer told us that we needed to wait in a different area since we were catching the night train, so he took us to a closed-off room with some chairs and told us to stay there. He left and we both breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the interaction was over. It's really scary being in a foreign country and having a police officer yell at you. We thought we might get stuck in Turkey. We started watching a movie on my laptop to pass the time. About an hour after we went to the new waiting room, the same officer comes in and tells us we have to move again. He says to follow him, so we do. He starts asking questions like, "What are you doing in Turkey? And how do you know each other?" etc. Questions any border control would ask. He escorts us back to the outside bench we had been sitting on originally. He asks to see our passports and tickets for the second time, and we show them to him. He points out which terminal our train will leave from. He stands by us asking questions for a few minutes and then leaves. This happens 2 or 3 more times. He comes and tells us we have to move and asks the same questions and looks at our passports. At this point, we're terrified that we're going to be detained and not make our train. It's nearly time to board our train, so we decide to head back over to the terminal. On our way over there, he intercepts us as we are about to get to the escalator. He grabs my arm, hard, and I look at my friend, horrified. He looks at my friend and tells her, "You go on," and points at the escalator. She gets on the escalator. What else could she do when an officer with a gun gives an order? He waits until she gets a bit away, all the while gripping my arm. Then he looks at me and says, "Are you on Instagram?" I'm stunned. I say yes and give him my Instagram username. He asks me to type it into his phone, so I do. He lets go of my arm and says have a good trip. I reconnect with my friend and we run to get on the train and find our seats. I'm in tears at this point. The whole day had been so scary. I thought we were being flagged as suspicious for getting to the train so early when all the while was just some creep trying to chat me up or something. He followed me on Insta and sent a message request along the lines of, "What's up, remember me?" I blocked him. My friend asked why I gave him my Instagram at all, and I told her I just wanted the interaction to be over and for him to let me on the train. It was near the beginning of my 7th grade year, the first week of October. My school put 7th and 8th grade kids in with the 9th to 12th graders in the same school, so I was brand new to high school. At my bus stop, there were a bunch of older kids from around the neighborhood, and especially from the apartment complex down the street. I had met a new friend, Ben, who moved to our town from the neighboring town that summer. He would ask about everyone, and I was his guide in getting him the scoop when it came to anything or who anyone was. He had met everyone by this point except 2 people, Max and James. James was in the grade above us, and Max was in our grade. Both of these kids had always been not the cleanest, friendliest, or smartest kids in the school, but I never got into anything with them where I would personally dislike them, but I wasn't friends with them either. I finally told Ben about them when he asked who they were after we saw them go into the bushes with a bottle of black spray paint and paint their heads for the school day, if this shows you what type of people they were. When we got onto the bus that was filled with the aroma of spray paint fumes, Ben asked me about them and I told him they weren't very smart and clean. This had gone on for a couple of more weeks, at least until the beginning of November. They would eventually gravitate towards other colors of spray paint like red, green, and blue, all most likely provided by their non-concerning parents. If you don't know, it is illegal to buy spray paint if you're under 18, and since they were both 13 to 14, they definitely got it from the garage or something. We all got used to the smell of paint on the bus, and the initial laugh my group of friends and I had when we saw that the paint on James' head had dripped down his shirt and stained it had gone away since it had been going on for over a month. And this is where the story gets interesting. One day, Max and James were at their usual spot in the bushes near the bus stop. This is located on the side of my neighbor's house by the road, as our bus stop is on the intersection of 2 neighborhood roads. James got the smart idea to go to the back side of my neighbor's house with a black spray paint can. He knelt down and covered his mouth and nose as Max watched him and egged him on. At this point, I see trespassing and destruction of personal property, so I yell, "Hey, would you just cut that out, James?" To this, James and Max were pretty surprised as they thought they were being sneaky and no one would catch them. This is right when the bus came, so we all got on. They throw the can in the bushes like they did every day and get on the bus. So I was talking with friends that day, telling them what had happened, and when I got home I told my mom and dad, and they told me to go inform the neighbor before we left for dinner that night. So I walk up to this neighbor's house and knock on the door and tell them what I saw, and he reassured me that he found a black streak of paint on his back wall. I tell him their names and where they lived if they wanted to go talk to them, and he said he'd be out next morning to see what they have to say. The next morning, the neighbor was on their front porch talking with James and Max and, in short, told them to come clean and repaint the wall that evening or he would press charges on both of them. From what I know, James and Max got their butts handed to them from their parents, and they were the ones providing the paint and had absolutely no idea that 2 bratty teenagers would try to vandalize someone's property with spray paint. However, they did clean up the streak, and I thought that was it. I thought they had learned their lesson. The next day, it was raining, so my dad took me up to my bus stop in his truck to wait. During this time, we saw Max swiping something with his right hand at James, but not knowing what it was, we thought he was just playing around. No, it was a knife, and according to Max, he brought it to the bus stop to stab James for getting him in trouble. It didn't stop there, however. As I was later informed, the neighbor told them who told him they did it, and they got me thinking that he would have tried to stab me as well. The day goes on with an odd bus ride as my friend tells me that Max told him he had a knife. So my friend goes and tells the teacher on bus duty that makes sure everyone gets to school safely that Max had a knife. So second period, I was called down to the office and was met with the chief of police, a deputy, the superintendent, the principal, and the vice principal. I told them all what happened, and they ended up calling Ben down as well as my friend who told on Max and James. James got off free as he didn't bring a knife, but Max got sent to juvie for a multitude of different reasons. About a year later, we were having our school pep rally, a large assembly for the homecoming football game. That morning, I saw cops at James's house and didn't see him at the bus stop. I figured his parents got into trouble with drugs or something, as they weren't the best people around. However, I found out that James had a hit list for that day as well as a plan, and told a classmate who would tell the police. On the hit list were many people, but no names were given to who he specifically wanted to go after. However, he planned on going into school late with a gun in his backpack. We had no security then, we do now because of this, and wait until the entire student body was in the gym for the pep rally and he would open fire. This definitely scared the life out of me and made me think of all my surroundings a lot more, as well as becoming anxious around large crowds. James ended up getting sent to juvie as well. I have not seen them since 7th grade and I'm in 10th grade now. Scary to see what people can plan and do. To all the school victims out there, I'm sorry, and I couldn't imagine how you felt and are feeling. God bless you. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.